We're going to start with our first study unit, namely the basic concepts of development that you find in Chapter 1. In your study guide, your book in front of you, as well as on the mind map, there you see you can go to number 1. There you have the stages of development that we are going to study under child and adolescent development. Okay? So, the stages would then be, the first one is the prenatal stage, also consisting of the germinal, the embryonic, and the fetal stages of development before birth. After that, we will have a look at the neonatal stage. That is the first 2 weeks of life. And following on that, we will look at infancy, which goes up to about the 2nd year of life. Third one would be early childhood, which goes from about 2 to 6 years. After that, middle childhood, from about 6 years to puberty. Puberty means about 10, 11 years of age, and then adolescence, which is from puberty to early adulthood. That is the part that we will cover in child and adolescent development. And then for the last 3 sessions of the semester, we will cover selected topics and aspects from adult development. Okay? A second important aspect is that you need to understand which are the domains, which are the areas of development in child and later adult development that we are going to study. We're going to study more areas or domains of development in childhood development than we are going to study in adulthood development. In childhood development, it is essential that you really understand as much of development as you possibly can, and that you really can follow the processes of development. Therefore, we're going to look at the domains of the physical development. That means we're going to look at development that takes place in the body, in the brain of the child, the genetics, what they have inherited in their genes from dad and mom, but also what happens in the chemistry of the body. Nutrition, things like hormones, the influences of certain internal chemical products, neurotransmitters, etc., etc. Then we're also going to look at movement, how movement develops in the young child. Movement, and we refer to that as motor development. All movement is called motor development. Okay. Then next we're going to look at cognitive. The word cognitive means thinking. We're going to look at thinking, cognitive development. All the skills, all the abilities that we all have developed from birth to where we are now to be able to optimally think. So, what do we do with our cognition? In the first place, our cognitive development refers to how we gather information. And how do we gather information? By means of our senses. How many senses do we have?
5.
Thank you. So those are your ways of gathering information. Then we look at, once we have the information, what do we do with it? How do we interpret it? And how do we process what we know and what we have gathered? Simply, what do we do with what we have learned or what we know? And then lastly, under cognitive, we're going to look at where we store. You can't gather information and then breathe once or twice and wow, there it goes. You store all your information. How do we store it? And once again, how do we retrieve it? Now, I also remember in your first year program, you also did some of that. So that will not be new. And I will not go into it in such detail as you had in the first year part. Okay, it's just to have a look how it really then works in young children and throughout our developmental phases. That is our cognitive part. Then we're going to have a look at personality, who we are, who we really are within our worlds. And we're going to have a look at the totality, because that is what personality is. It is the total makeup of you. It's the totality of all your characteristics, and that is your personality. We look at that. We will also discuss how you as an individual is highly unique. Highly, highly unique. I don't know whether you have discovered, perhaps in your first year, that what makes you so unique as a person, the fact that you have fingerprints, handprint, and footprints. And your handprints and footprints have never through all time existed and will never through all time that lies ahead of us ever exist again. So your hand and footprints are absolutely unique, but it doesn't end there. Your eye print, you have rings in your eyes. Your visual prints, your eye prints, is equally unique. No one else living, has ever lived, or will ever live, will have the same eye print as you have. Further, doesn't stop there. Your brain print, the folding of your brain, you also studied that in your first year. The folding of your brain, of your cerebral cortex, is absolutely unique. It can never be repeated, ever. Can you understand that we say we are all unique? And we will have a look at that uniqueness as part of our personality. Then, in personality, we're also going to have a look at self, a sense of self. In other words, who you are, who you experience yourself to be, how you really know about yourself. And there are guidelines, if we want to understand the sense of self, the sense of self, that's the broader understanding. The sense of self says, who am I? Your self-concept says, what is my value? And your identity says, where do I fit into my world? Okay, so we will have a look at your sense of self, your self-concept, identity formation, etc., etc. Then we will also look at your social life, because you cannot develop, you cannot grow if you are not related to other people. You know, there's an old saying that says, no man is an island. And we need the interactions from other people to really make who we are. Relatedness is an essential component of development and of humanity. And under social development, we will have a look at all interactions and relationships that take place in development and what their meaning would be. We will have a look at attachment, the very, very first and the very basic form of all relationships that takes place in a young child and a caregiver or the immediate others. And that is the example, the prototype of all other relationships that will ever develop and occur after that. So we have a look where relatedness starts, and that is in attachment. Then we will look at socialization. What happens when you are with other people? What are the processes that you will follow? What are the guidelines that you receive from your culture as far as relating to other people is concerned? That is socialization. And lastly, moral development. We will also look at our understanding and the development of our understanding of what is right and wrong, what works amongst people? Where are my boundaries? Where can I play and where must I rather stay away from? So our moral development, we will also have a look at. Good? In our development, there are certain issues, and especially issues that aren't very important to the layman. So it doesn't really worry each and every one of us what these processes are. But for students of psychology, it is very good to understand and to know of these various domains and processes that we really need to understand. Because when you become a psychologist, you are also going to work with the outcomes of these very important processes. So let us look at the developmental issues are exactly those processes. So developmental issues. The first issue that we need to understand would be the process between what nature has made of you and what nurture has made of you. Those are two concepts that you must understand from the very beginning. Nature says, what have you inherited? What is your genetic inheritance that you got from your parents? You had no choice in that. You simply got them, okay? And that is nature. To what extent does nature determine how you become, how your development unfolds? And then, equally powerful, we have nurture. Nurture says, what happens in your environment? What is the contribution of your environment? What is the contribution? And such environment would exist of all those forces influencing your development, starting with parents, starting with a good or conducive and safe environment, or not such a safe environment. It entails feeding. How well are you fed? How well are you cared for? How well do you receive assistance in your physical development, like health issues, etc., etc. So we need to understand that two very important determinants of all development in all people, from conception to death, would be nature and nurture. Genes, your inheritance, and also the environment in which you live. The second important issue that you just need to understand something about is our development continuous or is it discontinuous? In other words, do we develop like a tree? The seed is planted, then the seed germinates and it comes up. It becomes a young tree, it becomes stronger, it becomes a big tree. That is continuous development. Can you see that? Or do we have discontinued development? For example, a butterfly. A butterfly is first in one aspect. There's a worm. Then there's a caterpillar or some seed of the worm. And then there is a butterfly. So it seems to be that the butterfly and other forms of life develops the same way. There is a development, and then it's discontinued. Something happens in between, and then it goes on with the rest of the development. What is interesting is many of our organs in our bodies are formed and are developed in exactly that same way. Your internal organs, you have the construction of cells, and we're going to study how cells are made. You have cells developing, and when they come to a certain group of cells, consisting of a certain number of cells, then your DNA, your chemical program, says, okay, halt the construction of new cells right there. Then there is a a plateau, a time of which the development of cells will go into a rest phase. So it's discontinued. And then the chemical structure, your DNA, will decide these cells that we now have here, it's like a pick and pay shopping bag. These cells that we now have here, what will they do? And then the chemical instruction will come, these cells will become a kidney. And then they will continue developing as a kidney. Can you see the discontinued? And the same happens with all our internal organ development. Good, we'll have a look at that. The next one would be passive or active. And that's very straightforward. Does life happen to us and we are innocent victims? We just have to go with the flow all the time and we can change nothing and we are just determined to become who we become. If we believe that, then we believe that the organism or the human is passive in development. Or, alternatively, are we active? Are we part of our own development? Can we influence our own development? Can we play a role in our own development? You realize that we are absolutely active participants in our own development. We can influence to a very large extent what happens in our lives. We'll have a look at that. Okay, and lastly, but not least, we will have a look at universal development and the influence of the cultural context. Universal development says there are things, because we are human, that we all have. Whether I am African, whether I am Indian, whether I'm white, whether I'm black, whether I come from a very old culture, like our San people, or whether I come from a fairly newly developed culture, there are certain things, because we belong to the species of the human race, Homo sapiens, we all have certain things. We breathe the same way. We see the same way. We all need to eat. We digest the same way. We all need to sleep. We rest the same way. Okay? So there are certainly things, also as far as our characteristics are concerned, where we have a certain amount of universal similarity with all of us sharing certain aspects. But a very large part of who we are is then made up of our position within our cultural contexts. And you all know, you're all very familiar, and some of you, most of you, very proud of the influences that your cultures and your cultural contexts had on you through your life. When we refer to cultural context, there we refer to our beliefs. Beliefs are thinking patterns. How we people in our culture think alike. The thinking patterns. We will have a look at the norms, what we find as acceptable and non-acceptable. We will have a look at our customs. How do we celebrate their birthdays? How do we celebrate the birth of a child? How do we celebrate the death of a loved one? Those are customs, very important customs in our cultures, that we will have a look at because they influence who we are. We will also have a look at the context within the setting of your life, namely the environment. Where exactly do you live? How safe is it or not safe is it? How conducive and good is it for you, for your health, for your development, for what makes meaning in your life? So when we look at the understanding of cultural context, then it consists of two aspects, namely your culture and your setting or environment. You need to understand that. Okay. Those are important developmental issues or processes that you just basically need to understand. And they're not very, very tough to study and to master. Now, lastly, for today, there are theories. So I have selected, and it's in your study guide, that we quickly have a look at the Erikson stages of psychosocial development, that we also understand Piaget's cognitive development stages, that is once again how you think. And lastly, that we have a look at a big name, Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner says you live in a world. Lots of things happen within you. That didn't concern him. He said what really happens in your world will, to a large extent, also develop your influence your development. And we're quickly going to have a look at those. Let's start with Erikson. Erikson is the so-called psychosocial developmental theory. And Erikson says that we go through a few developmental stages immediately after we are born to about our first year. We go through a stage in which we have to trust who takes care of us. If we cannot trust, we will not develop. We will not thrive. Second, in the young child, we need to understand autonomy. That is the moment where the child separates in his or her understanding, separates and sees, I am different from mom. For the first year, or perhaps even a bit longer, the child thinks he is still part of mom, like he or she was in the womb. And then at some stage, a cognitive development takes place in which the child then sees himself as different from the caregiver, different from the mother. And then the child needs to take a little bit of autonomy. I am me. I am different. I am developing. The third phase for a young child is a young child must develop initiative. And initiative, the temper tantrums that children throw, are indicators of their initiative. Horrible negative initiative, and it angers us as parents, but that's a way of saying, I want, I can, I want my way. That is initiative being taken. And whether we like it or not, we need to deal with it. We need to accept it. It's part of their important development. Initiative also says, and the words of young children very often is, let me, I want, give me. Have you heard that? In young children, that shows that their initiative is developing. If they cannot develop initiative, they will always be dependent and feel guilty about it. Okay? And that would impact personality development very negatively. Then we have the next one, which is industry. Industry is your school-going child. Certain skills are mastered in the school-going child, and they start using those skills. They start doing things, and that is the industry. That brings us up to about middle childhood. Then we go to adolescence. Adolescence, the main task is develop your identity. You must know who you are. You must know what your role is. You must know, you must know where you're going. You must know what your responsibilities are. So the main task for the adolescent is to develop identity. If you cannot, then it will remain in a state of confusion. I don't know who I am. I have no understanding of who I really am in my world. Then when we come, and that is up to adolescence, where we will study in this phase. Okay, and then very, very quickly, as people move into adulthood, they need to find a partner. They need to share their lives. So they need to develop intimacy. If they can't develop intimacy, that is, intimacy is not sex. It's part of sex, but it's not only sex. Intimacy is I can relate, I can meet, I can share, I can relate. Okay? If they can't develop intimacy, then they go for isolation, loneliness, not relatedness, etc. Then when we come to real adulthood, adults need to raise children. They need to teach. Teach young people, teach their children how life works. And that is generativity. Generativity says adults must work. Adults must share. Adults must teach. If they cannot teach and they cannot become generative, they will stagnate. Okay? And alcoholism and drug dependence is such a form of stagnation. Lastly, when people get old, they would like to sit on the stoops and complain, but they shouldn't. They should look back on their lives with integrity. And they should have meaning. And they should understand where their lives had gone good and had gone wrong. And they should make peace, etc. And that would be integrity. If they can't, they would die very sad, very lonely. Old people, in the sense that they then have despair, total despair. Why have I lived? Okay, this is Erikson's take or view on human development. Now, students often say to me, wow, this is a lot of stuff. How do I memorize it? I personally have a little rhyme. So those of you who want to make a rhyme, I've suggested mine. You don't have to follow it. It just works for me, and it had worked for me for years and years and years. So my little rhyme would be, it would be B for basic trust, A for autonomy, BA, 4 I's, I's being inferiority, industry, intimacy, identity, and intimacy. So B, A, 4 I's, G, generativity, and an I again. Okay? So you can make a little mantra of the Erikson developmental stages would be BA, 4 I's, GI. Let us quickly go to Piaget. You will get to know Piaget very, very well. So I'm not going to spend too much time. But Piaget also has 4 stages of development. In the young child, it's sensory motor. They don't know, they only do. The next phase, in the preschool child, it is pre-operational. So preschool, pre-operational. Then we come to concrete operational in the middle childhood. And then we come to formal operational from adolescence onward. Okay? There's a little rhyme. SM, pop, cop, fop. It can sound like a little swear word. Don't go there. Sensory motor, pre-operational pop, concrete operational cop, formal operational fop. Okay, you can read about that. It's very easy to memorize. What is very important as far as Piaget is concerned is the mental structures that we develop. Every everything that we do in our world, we have a mental structure for. And those structures are called schemas. All our information that we get through our senses, we put into schemas. And from our schemas, we rule our world. And then, what is important is when we gather new information, we need to change our schemes. And that we do through organization and assimilation and adaptation. And lastly, Bronfenbrenner. Say that? Bronfenbrenner. Bronfenbrenner said we live in systems. We function, we live, and we develop in systems in our environment. And Bronfenbrenner says we have 4 big systems. We have a microsystem, which is yourself and your immediate surroundings, such as your home, your family, etc. That's your microsystem. Very important influence. Secondly, you have your mesosystem. That would be your environment, where you live, your community, your school, your church, your friends, extended family, etc., etc. That would be your mesosystem. Very important interface between the micro and the mesosystem. They influence one another. Then you have an exosystem. That is more government and education and the taxes and the laws of the country, etc., etc. They impact on us, but we don't influence them immediately. And very lastly, you have your macro system, and that would really be the rest of the world out there.